Hey everybody, it's Jeff, and here's what I did the past few days on Workbench, where I stream my open source innovation work on Twitch. So on my path to creating my ideal front-end web framework in Go, I've been experimenting with a template system that works with Vecty. I originally built a prototype that output HTML like a standard template engine, and then I adapted it to output Vecty objects, and I got a proof of concept working with Vecty in the browser. But I really didn't want to make a template system that's specific to Vecty, and it felt like a totally different way to approach the code base. So, especially because there aren't a ton of good templating systems for Go. For some reason. So I wanted to make the functionality, or the core functionality, neutral to outputting HTML strings or Vecty objects. So then I could use it in this Vecty framework, or I could use it in the context where I'm just doing a regular server-side rendered page or something. So this took some time to figure out, which is why I started this on Thursday, didn't do an update, worked on it a little bit Friday, worked on it a little bit yesterday, but I've done it. And while I was at it, I also added an expression evaluator system. So most templating systems need some kind of expression evaluation, which leads to them usually inventing a new sort of micro language and having to build up helper functionality from scratch, or slowly building up bindings to helpers in the host language. Go's templating language suffers from this, has some built-in stuff. You can create Go functions to wrap existing Go functionality to expose them to the templating system, but you kind of have to do that in every instance, right? So since structurally this templating system was inspired by view templates, which are valid HTML, let me see if I can pull those up, because you might not know what they look like. So normal text interpolation looks pretty standard, and then they have these directives, which is valid HTML. And these directives, the common directives are bind. So you can bind some data that you have, as part of your, in this case, component or view instance or whatever, dynamic ID. The value of that is going to be set to the attribute ID. And of course, they show that you can use JavaScript expressions because this is a JavaScript framework, so it makes sense that you could do that. But as compared to other systems, right, JavaScript is pretty expressive for little things, right? Doing stuff like this is just that much more cumbersome in, say, Go or something. And then if you have to create something custom, it's even worse. So we have JavaScript expressions, and then basic conditionals, and there's some looping in there too. So I grabbed an off-the-shelf JavaScript interpreter written in Go called Goja. Auto exists. Goja is a little bit more modern and compliant with modern JavaScript, particularly with regular expressions, and in theory is a little bit faster. And made it so that there's an interface that you can implement different evaluators. So you can not only switch Goja out for auto if you want, or an actual V8 bindings, but you could replace it with Lua, or you could replace it with some static custom thing, or whatever you want. The result is pretty ergonomic, both in using it and the design. So this is the project so far, vtemplate, and the core vtemplate is defining basically kind of like an AST node, and it's based on using this HTML, which is an HTML parser. And so it basically goes through that and creates a new type of node that has a little bit of extra structure for doing the kinds of things that we want to do, conditionals and attributes that aren't necessarily HTML attributes. Like they might not be strings, they might be properties of a component in Vecty, right? So attributes can be any kind of value. So really this was set up for both of those in mind, and then basically set up with hooks so you can create custom elements, custom directives, and custom evaluators. So what we have is a templating system framework inspired by view templates. So you can do kind of these HTML compliant customized templating systems using this. And that was kind of the approach of how to split this up. This is generic enough that I can do an HTML version that has directives specific to generating HTML output, and I can do another that's specific to doing Vecty with Vecty specific directives. For example, event handlers, doesn't make much sense to do that in HTML, but it does in Vecty. And so as an example, here's what it looks like. We have a little data structure of a person, and we use that in a map, so it's just a different kind of data structure. And then here's our template. It looks like a view template. We don't do conditionals in here, but we do have some JavaScript kind of inline conditionals for defining the class that's going to be used for this person. So basically we have this silly contrived, like, is this person a millennial or not? I am. Gary Oldman is not. And then we get their first name, which is very easy in JavaScript, and we can even do a simple calculation to get their age, right, since we have their year of birth. We create a parser. We set up this with the built-in HTML directives, our Goja evaluator, and we even have a custom, this is kind of silly, custom element here just to experiment with this. Like, all it does is replace it with demo, so foobar tags become demo tags. Normally I would take that out, but I forgot. But here's what it looks like, right? And so that worked out quite nicely. So now that I have this working with the HTML renderer, I'm going to go back and rebuild the Vecty renderer, which should be a little bit easier now with this new sort of like core API. But it does have its own implementations of directives that I need to do, and then also set it up so that custom elements then wrap how Vecty handles components, and implement slots, which are, if you were to do a component or a custom element that has content inside, how can that custom element use that inner content. And I think all of that's set up. I just have to implement it. Like, in terms of figuring out how all this stuff is done, I think I've done it. So after that, I'll be ready to start building components with Vecty, and just as a sort of like what I plan to do, because I have a specific application in mind, but I would love to recreate the React components for the semantic UI components. Semantic UI is CSS framework, has a bunch of sort of components in terms of CSS elements, things that you can build in your designs. And they originally implemented the dynamic stuff with jQuery, and then somebody, which is kind of, you don't really want to use those when you have a React system. So they have a native sort of React re-implementation of all of those. So now you have React components for all the components in this semantic UI sort of UI kit. And so I'd like to start, because I use that all the time, I'd like to start getting those re-implemented in Go, and I can build apps with them. But I have some other, like a tree view and some other stuff that I need to kind of get at the kind of big project that I'm working on. So that's it. Let me know if you have thoughts or questions in the comments, and subscribe if you'd like to start following along, or join me on Twitch. Tuesdays and Thursdays are when I work on this sort of thing. All that information is on Twitch, so check it out. Thanks for watching. See you later.